Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat about Paul Niland, journalist and CEO founder of Lifeline Ukraine, the national suicide prevention resource for the country. This is the third year in succession that I've chatted with Paul from his apartment in Kyiv as he and his fellow Ukrainians prepare for another wartime Christmas and the prospect of yet another year of this brutal invasion. Even though Paul is experiencing the effects of the relentless stress of living through war, he says the mood there is one of resolute resistance. Ukraine will not capitulate, and he is confident that victory will come. We spoke about daily life in Kyiv, the possible difference that Trump may make, how people end up being hardened by war, and we even spoke about Christmas trees. This is my last podcast of 2024, and I'd like to thank all of my guests this year, and I'd like to especially thank you, my listeners. Have a wonderful, peaceful Christmas. And let's hope that Paul and his fellow Ukrainians will experience this too, sooner rather than later. Let's hear it from Paul. Paul Niland, founder and CEO of Lifeline Ukraine. A huge welcome back to the Win Happy podcast. How are you doing?
Greg, it's great to be back chatting with you again. I'm doing okay. Things are obviously difficult here, and we've got plenty of time to get into the many, many reasons why. But let's get into the questions and see where this conversation goes.
Yeah, okay. Now, a lot of the listeners will not have been introduced to you beforehand. So could we do a quick 2 or 3 minutes, how in the name of God you ended up there and what Lifeline Ukraine is all about?
Sure. I came to Ukraine 21 years ago. And I came here simply because I have Ukrainian friends and they kept inviting me to come and visit. So I did in the end and ended up falling in love with this place. And then, living in Kyiv, you're party to and witness to momentous events. If you've been here in the time that I've been here, I've been through the Orange Revolution. I've been through the Revolution of Dignity or Euromaidan, which, still to this day, it's insane to me, when I went to Maidan and throughout the Revolution of Dignity, I mean, it was 93 days and I was there, in part on 89 of those 93 days. And you see these idiots in the United States and elsewhere saying it was a coup, the CIA did a coup, like Victoria Niland walked around handing out cookies. You're insane. If you think her cookies sustained that for 93 days, there's something wrong with you. But, the conspiracy theorists have to look for tenuous connections everywhere. They do this kind of nonsense, which I find insulting, I mean, one of the reasons I'm here is because the people of this country are they're awe-inspiring, and everybody sees it now, through 3 years of this full-scale invasion, through this horrible big war that we're experiencing. You all see how great Ukrainians are, but I've seen it. I've seen it for decades and firsthand. And, that's what keeps me here. And you asked about Lifeline Ukraine and to introduce that. I was given the opportunity to create something special for this country, which is Ukraine's first and only ever national suicide prevention hotline, right? So they exist everywhere. I was born in Dublin, but I was raised in the UK. And, we just knew in the UK, like if you're having difficult times, you turn to the Samaritans. And nobody had ever done that for Ukraine. And the Minister of Health at the time is somebody that I'd known in actual fact since the end days of the Revolution of Dignity. And she asked me to create this. And I thought, what a way for me to contribute something hugely meaningful to this society and this country. And in the 5 years that we've been operational, I organized a gathering for our 5th birthday. And I knew that at that time we were very, very close to having, in that entire period, provided 100,000 instances of care, right? Or instances of support. In that 5-year period, 100,000 times we've answered the phone or supported somebody through chat. And on the day of the presentation, I wrote to my project manager, Nastia, and I said, give me the actual number as it stands now. And she replied, and the number which I read out during the presentation then was 99,961. On the day of our 5th birthday, that's how many times we'd provided support to the people of Ukraine, 99,961. That's who we are. That's what I do. Oh, I'm a journalist as well, by the way.
Absolutely, and providing valuable updates all of the time and insights. So for anyone who's listening, you write regularly for, is it Byline Times?
Yeah, I write for Byline Times mostly. I've written for the Atlantic Council, the Centre for European Policy Analysis. I've written in lots of places over the last decade, as a Google will show anybody.
Yeah, and Paul is very active as well on Twitter, if anyone wants to follow him, or X, as it's more horribly called now today. We were introduced, first of all, you were very, very good to accept my invitation to come on the podcast. And I think it was literally a week before Putin invaded Ukraine. He had his 200,000 plus troops literally sitting on the border. We were speculating on the conversation as to whether it was going to happen or not. And since then, I've had you on the podcast a good number of times. And this is now like a horrible tradition we have going, whereby we've come on the call just before Christmas. So this is our 3rd Christmas, Paul, together. But believe it or not, and I'm sorry to say that, it's horrible. Who would have thought there would have been 1, let alone 2, and here we are on number 3, which is awful, awful, awful. I had a quick look at the papers. Now, we were due to have this conversation a couple of weeks ago, and I know you were sick on the day. I'm not surprised at all, because I know the pressure that you must be under and all of your fellow Ukrainians. I'm just looking at some of the questions that I had laid out, some of the things that I wanted to chat about. And it's funny, even in a fortnight, how many things have moved on a little bit. And we can go through all of that. I quickly had a look at the paper as well today, the Irish Times, just to see what was being covered here at this moment in time. And there was just one headline. I was thinking, gee, Chris, there must be something in the newspaper on World News or something that we're reading about. Russia targets Ukraine energy system. So that was the one little headline that was carried this particular weekend. What's going on now? Can you give me and the listeners an update as to what it's like on the ground and how you see it?
Before I respond to what's in that one headline that you've just dug out today, let me just talk to you about being sick, because I don't mind sharing that with you and your listeners. I've had for a long time, actually, an issue whereby I'm vomiting frequently, and it's very unpleasant, and I've been that way for a while, and I get about my day and I do what I need to do. It's particularly linked to stress, in fact. And so, some time ago, I decided I'm going to get under a doctor's orders and, get under medication and get a hold of this. I was in the pharmacy refilling my prescription. So, literally a couple of weeks ago when we were due to chat, and the woman looks at me as she's handing over my prescription, and she says to me, "You need less stress." and then she points out of the window, and these are our daily interactions. And she says, obviously, that's very difficult here, but you need less stress in your life. And I've kind of taken that to heart as well. While I've been through this recovery over the last couple of weeks, I've been trying to pay more attention to my stress levels. And, we are all, those of us who are here, we are affected by this. And so if we go to the one headline that you've picked out about Russia targeting the energy infrastructure in Ukraine again, the first date that they did that was the 22nd of October of 2022. And I remember it very, very well. There was an attack, a missile attack in the center of Kyiv on that same day, on that very morning during rush hour. And they hit an important intersection right next to one of the most famous universities, Taras Shevchenko University, which is next to Shevchenko Park. They actually hit. It's a beautiful, beautiful park with ancient trees and statues, and it's a place we all know and love. And there was a missile that landed right next to the kids' play park inside of Shevchenko Park on that day. And so the Russians have been doing this for forever. And there are several problems to that. One is the way in which it's often reported, which is, Russia says this is in retaliation to, let's say, for example, recent US permission to use their weaponry to hit targets in Kursk, right? For example. It's not, though. It's not. They do this. They hit our energy infrastructure on a regular basis. It's like every 2 weeks. They stockpile missiles so that they can fire them at us in bulk, en masse, so that they're trying to overwhelm our air defenses because, they're aware of the limited number of air defense units that we have here. And they're doing it all the time, and they've been doing it for years. So it's not in retaliation to anything. But that is one of the war crimes that is repeatedly being committed in broad daylight in Europe, now in 2024. It is a war crime to deprive a civilian population of the basic necessities of life. And I'm no spring chicken, as my grey beard will attest, but I don't mind if I have to run up half a dozen flights of stairs. It doesn't bother me. I'm okay. In general, the health issues aside that I just mentioned. But in general, I'm a fit guy. But I have plenty of neighbours who are elderly, who have limited mobility, and they can't make those stairs when they have to go shopping, or mums when they want to take their kids out for some fresh air. Like, it's inhumane, and so we've all kitted up to be prepared to cope with these periods of blackout. I woke up this morning, there was no electricity, so, okay, I have a thermos flask that I will normally fill, before I go to bed so that I can have a cup of tea in the morning, right? I have a power unit at home that powers I switched to fiber optic internet, so that works all the time, even when the power is off. And I've got a power unit that powers my TV and the router. So, I'm good. I've got my candles, I've got my lights, got my guitar. I'm all right. That said, there exists still a very real risk, even here in Kyiv, in the capital, which is quite well protected. But, there exists a real threat that something could hit us, any one of us, in an hour. Literally, it can be that close.
Yeah, and I'm reading reports about air raid sirens being heard again quite a lot in Kyiv. For a while, Kyiv seemed to be away from the action, but now it seems to be eye of the storm again. Is that right?
No, we've always been targeted, and I was reminded. I watched a film, and in fact, I'd forgotten about this, but I watched a film called The Battle for Kyiv, which is by a guy called Oz Kajerji, and it's also a Byline Times or a Byline TV production. And after the defeat of the Russian land force invasion, when they tried to reach the capital, when they were fighting, we all know what they did when they'd occupied Bucha and how they destroyed Borodyanka and what happened in Irpin and so on. You've heard these stories. These are close places to us. These are places that are a short drive away from the center of Kyiv. And when the land war was turned, the tide was turned, there was a campaign of bombing the capital that carried on for a good period of time then. And I was only reminded about it by watching the film. I'd forgotten that happened. But it just was like, we're at war, we're being targeted. That's what it is. And then, as I said, it was in October of 2022 that they came after the energy infrastructure and struck the very center of Kyiv as well. They're always doing it. They're always doing it. And, it's huge numbers, swarms of these Iranian-made Shahed drones up to, there was a record day 3 days ago where they used over 200 of them in a single day. Yeah. And this isn't a drone like we're talking about, what on earth is happening in the United States. What are those strange lights in the sky? We're talking about devices that are designed to kill. They carry high explosive. They've now been retrofitted. In fact, these Shahed drones, and these have been used in cities like Odessa. They're being fitted with thermobaric explosive devices that create a fireball that sucks the oxygen out of everything within the blast radius. They're awful, awful weapons. And they're being used on civilian targets in residential buildings in Odessa, on people's apartments.
Could we have imagined that this would have turned out like this and gone on for so long? And okay, America and Europe and everywhere else gave money and aid, not sufficient, and that all came with a lot of conditions. You're not allowed to use the weapons to retaliate, but you can use them to defend yourself in your own country and all that kind of thing. How it's played out since the very, very beginning. Has it surprised you, or could we have predicted it?
So I'll answer that with two of my articles. My most recent one, which is probably about 3 weeks old, but it's always my pinned tweet, is that Ukraine will not capitulate. Ukraine has shown for almost 3 years now that Ukraine will not capitulate. Ukraine will fight to liberate Ukrainian lands and to reverse Russian occupation of all Ukrainian territory. That is the mood in this country. So that's where we are today. Could we have predicted this? On the 26th of February, 2 days into the full-scale war, I had an article published where I predicted two things. I predicted, and I've probably told you this before, that Russia's casualties would be immense, and that would be the trigger, as it was, after a decade of the Soviet Union fighting in Afghanistan. It was the soldiers' mothers and wives who stood up and said, "We are not having this," right? So I assumed that the same would happen. But do you know what the death toll and the casualty rates were for a decade of fighting in Afghanistan compared to less than 3 years of fighting here in Ukraine? I can tell you the death toll was about 14,000, I believe, and the wounded was another 30,000 or something like that, right? The dead and maimed in Russia's catastrophic war against Ukraine since the February the 24th of 2022, it passed 760,000 yesterday. And so my earliest predictions of what would change the outcome of this war, that people in Russia would stand up to this immense loss of life comparable with Afghanistan, has been absolutely blown out of the water. I could not have predicted that their losses would be this high and that they would continue. Any other country would have just gone, "We're beat, man. We are done. We took an absolute hiding." The end. 760,000 casualties. 760,000 compared to 14,000 dead and 35,000 injured in a decade in Afghanistan. So no, I was wrong in my earliest predictions of what would lead to an end to this war. It continues because there are sufficient Russians who are willing to sign up for military service for a signing bonus of $23,000, which is a fortune in that country. And, maybe the family can afford to install an indoor toilet, a flushing toilet, because a third of them don't have that. That's a fact. But for a $23,000 signing bonus, they'll take 10 days of basic training and be dead in Ukraine within 2 weeks. But they're still able to recruit sufficient numbers to keep trying to press forward and take more destroyed territory.
Yeah, you must imagine, and I know we've had this conversation before, that the ruble would drop with people, that the wives, the girlfriends, the parents, the children, this is just insanity. Why is there not an uprising in that country? And I presume the propaganda and everything else is still there, heroic figures out there battling God knows what in this strange land. That penny, that ruble is not dropping. It's amazing that it hasn't really. And okay, you've got that signing on bonus or whatever that might gloss over a little bit. But you would think in a rational society that would go, enough is enough. This is crazy. What are we doing this for? Do they, and have they, any piece of logic to justify what's happening? Have they?
That's a really good question. That's a really, really good question, actually. And I've spent a lot of time studying Russian narratives and Russian propaganda and Russian statements. I've written articles. There was an article that I'd written, in fact, taking the definition of fascism and explaining how, on each of those qualifying points, and I think there were 14 of them in total, how contemporary Russia meets that definition. Russia today is a fascist society, a fascist state. And both of those things are equally true, a fascist society and a fascist state. And the very day that I was due to send that article in, I always write something and then come back to it fresh eyes the next day. Medvedev had just come out and made a statement, and it was perfectly aligned with exactly what I'd just written. It was a demonstration of fascism, and so I used that as the new introduction to my article, the new opening paragraph, to give it very fresh context. Here's what Medvedev has just said, and so to give that fresher context, and that was maybe 18 months ago I wrote that article. Medvedev came out again yesterday and said Ukraine now has a choice. Either it will be a part of Russia or it will cease to exist as a country. I'm sorry. I mean, we know obviously that the period that he spent in the presidency was only because Putin allowed it temporarily before Putin himself came back. But, he is a senior figure of the Russian regime, having been with Putin since his days in St. Petersburg when they were pally-pally with the mafia and ripping off the city for deals where they exported raw materials and promised imports of food that never arrived and so on and so on. I mean, Medvedev has been a part of this corrupt duo for decades and plays a secondary role to Putin. But even so, he's coming out and saying Ukraine will be a part of Russia or it will cease to exist yesterday. So what are Russia's goals? If you're the average Russian, what are you fighting for? It was the question. So, I mean, there's been a series of lies, all of which have been debunked and can be debunked simply by the evidence, by the facts. And the first set of lies was coming to protect the people of the Donbass because Ukraine has been shelling them for 8 years. It's bullshit. According to Minsk, Ukraine's heavy artillery was all in storage. It was all monitored. We weren't firing anything. The number of civilian deaths on the front line in 2021, the year before the full-scale invasion, was 24. 24, and most of them were landmines. Nobody was shelling the Donbass. So the idea of coming to protect the people of Donbass was a lie. The idea of liberating lands because Russian speakers happen to be there and they want to be with Russia is a lie. You can see the city of Bakhmut, Avdiivka, all of these places are simply destroyed. They are ruins. They are uninhabitable. There is nobody there. Nothing has been liberated. It's been wiped off the face of the planet. The other lie is battling Nazism. Excuse me. No. Ukraine is an open and tolerant society. I live next door to a synagogue. Literally, I can look out of my window and I can see a synagogue. And then there are some Russians who are convinced that they're fighting for the motherland, where they consider these parts of Ukraine or all of Ukraine, depending on the degree of the imperialist mindset of the individual, to be a fake entity and it's really Russian land and they're going to take it. And that's that. What they need to understand is that the motherland for them is where their borders end according to the breakup of the Soviet Union in 1991. We here in Ukraine had a vote about independence. It was done and settled. And if you look at the provinces, the oblasts in the east where this war was started back in 2014, Donetsk and Lugansk, in 1991, they voted by an overwhelming 83% majority to be part of an independent Ukraine, as did Crimea by a majority as well, by a majority bigger than that, which secured Brexit. Thank you very much.
So I'm battling in the trenches for a bunch of ideas that I don't understand. It's just catastrophic. There's no sign of this ending anytime soon. And suddenly I've got a bunch of colleagues alongside me from North Korea who are delighted with themselves. It's the only time they've been allowed to leave their country, and they end up in the trenches with Russians. God almighty, how bizarre is this getting?
So one of the funniest stories about the North Koreans is that now they're in Russia. They've got a version of the internet which is significantly less censored than they're used to in North Korea, and they've just discovered porn.
Yeah.
And so they're all busy jacking themselves up, literally, it's funny. But I mean, like, if you think about the brainwashing of the Russian people, as we've just been discussing, and then you think about the brainwashing of the North Korean people and the really bizarre shit that they believe, right? And, if they were, again, go back to the question of what is the motherland, right? If they were being called to action because there was a threat to North Korea, you could imagine that those guys are going to get up and fight, right? Because, hang on, this is our country. But what must their mind be telling them about being in the cursed region of Western Russia? How is that serving the Kim dynasty? It's Bizarro World added on top of Bizarro World. But let's actually just roll that back as well. I mean, we can talk about the North Korean soldiers masturbating. We can have a chuckle about this, but this is one of the most tyrannical and evil regimes on the planet that is supporting Russia. Another tyrannical and evil regime that is supporting Russia is Iran. We were talking about their drones earlier on, these Shahed drones, right? Another tyrannical and evil regime, slightly role reversed, that Russia was until recently supporting has been that of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, which spectacularly fell a week ago, revealing the horrors that Putin had extended by a decade with his intervention. I mean, that's what this world is facing right now. And so, yeah, the craziness of North Korea being drawn in to try to expel the Ukrainian invasion of Kursk, lol. But in all seriousness, look at this coalition that Ukraine is actually fighting against, and realize that we truly are in a good versus evil moment for the world. Putin, aligned with the Syrian dictator, butcher Assad, who is now in Moscow, and aligned with the mullahs in Iran, and aligned with the lunatics in North Korea. That's what Ukraine's fighting, in all seriousness.
The headline in your piece that you mentioned a few weeks ago is now is the time to put the boot into Russia. And I was reflecting on the 2 weeks since I was prepping for this, and the collapse of the regime in Syria is exactly one of those things that happened in that fortnight.
Yeah.
And part of it was that the depleted Russian resources not being able to prop him up anymore. So it probably is a really, really good time to put the boot into Russia. What does that look like, and what needs to happen to properly put the boot into them?
So did I really write 2 weeks ago that Putin wouldn't have the resources to go and back up Assad? No. Did I write that? Anyway, you absolutely put the boot in. I was watching last night. I boxed when I was a youngster. It's a sport that I've always loved. And there was a Netflix documentary a show about the fight between Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk for the undisputed heavyweight championship of the world. Dislike it a little bit because it's sports washing, it's Riyadh, it's Saudi Arabia. There's another element of this realignment of the world that we could get into discussing as well. But I was watching this boxing documentary last night, and it says everything about Ukraine as a nation right now. And what did Usyk do when he got Tyson Fury rocked, and you could see it, and he'd lost a couple of rounds. He lost the fifth and the sixth. Fury won them quite handily. But then in the seventh, he came back and he started hurting him, and he continued punishing him throughout the rest of he took a few as well, but he continued punishing him throughout the rest of the fight. And it was a close call in the end and a split decision, but it was the right one. But when his knees are going, right, when he's trying to come back up and he can't refocus as fast as he had, and you know, he's rattling around. You put the boot in, you take him out. And with Russia having lost 760,000 troops, now is exactly the time that everything that Ukraine can unleash on any legitimate military target in Russia, now is the time to do that without exception. To show them before it comes to the point, and this is what everybody's talking about, and I just shared actually on Twitter, I won't call it X, I just shared on Twitter a thread by the president of the Kyiv School of Economics, where he was talking about being on a trip to Europe last week. And everybody's talking about, what America might want because now Trump has been reelected, what Germany might want, what this interest might be. And what he's pointing out is that actually what you're all overlooking is what Ukraine wants. And he says the outcome of this war will be dictated by those men that are willing to fight it and the conditions on the battlefield. And that is the predominant attitude here in Ukraine of let's finish them. Let's finish this. Because this actually has been going on not since 2022, not since 2014. One of the first things I learned about when I came here all those years ago, I discussed this actually over dinner last night, was the Holodomor, the manufactured famine that took the lives of millions and millions of Ukrainians. It was an act of genocide. I've written about this, in fact, in an article asking that more countries and organizations recognize what happened as an act of genocide. It's been going on for a long time. It's about time that Ukraine put them in their place. And Ukraine has, for 3 years, fought like lions, and they deserve the opportunity to go like Usyk did in those closing rounds against Tyson Fury, a man that was much larger in stature, has a good deal longer reach as well, and finish it off. Ukraine's earned the right to finish this off.
Do they have the capacity to do that, Paul, the capability?
Yes.
Okay. Let's put the boot in.
I mean, I said yes very, very quickly. There's a whole bunch of qualifiers that I can add to that. Those capacities can be added to, they should be added to in terms of volume of ammunition that is sent to Ukraine, in terms of the volume of fighter pilots that are being trained, right? Because when it does come down to it, so I was saying about this thread from the president of KSC, there are ideas that Trump is going to force some kind of, let's see if we can work this out, right? At that point, that will inevitably happen, that people will make efforts to see if they can work it out. I'll tell you why it's complicated and why they will fail. We can go on to that, but there will be efforts, and Ukraine needs to be in as strong a position as possible. And one of the things that puts Ukraine in a very strong position is to say to Russia, we've got 100 Ukrainian pilots who are in F-16 training right now, and we will have those planes here by the spring, right? That's one of the things that puts Ukraine in a strong negotiating position. With the weapons that Ukraine has that can reach airfields, for example, within strike distance of whatever capability or capacity might be supplied to Ukraine, they can be hit, and that stops them. We've in fact seen it. It stops the Russian use of these horrible, what's called glide bombs, that are between a half a ton, a ton, and a ton and a half of explosive that have just destroyed vast blocks and blocks and blocks and blocks of Kharkiv, the second largest city in this country, because they're within that range. But now we've forced Russia to relocate their stuff further away, their planes further away. Now there are less of these horrible glide bombs hitting Kharkiv. There's many things that can be done to give Ukraine more capacity to finish this sooner. But does Ukraine have the ability to win? Yes, absolutely, because Ukraine is going to win. However long it takes, Ukraine is going to win. Full stop. So, yes, Ukraine has the capability, because that's the only way this ends.
And the Time Person of the Year, our good buddy Donald. I presume you weren't very happy, Paul, that a lot of nutjob Americans decided it was a good idea to vote for Donald?
Let me come back to my issues. Let me come back to my health issues. I woke up that morning. It was a Wednesday morning, and I couldn't consume anything because I had to have a general anaesthetic for an endoscopy. And the anaesthetist said to me, he came in and had a chat. He was a lovely man. And he said to me as I was in the operating room and I'm lying on the table, he says, "Have you thought of a dream yet?" And I said to him, "The one where Donald Trump didn't just win the election." And he went, and I was out. I was gone. That's literally what happened that day. Listen, I mean, it is what it is. The world is going to have to deal with the fact that for the next 4 years, a whole bunch of nut jobs, not just the top nut job, but a whole bunch of nut jobs are going to be involved in some very important roles and functions in the most powerful country in the world. I mean, yes, I'm not happy. I would have been happy to have seen an extremely well-educated and qualified woman and a person of a different ethnic heritage taking that role. I would have been ecstatic and thrilled to have seen the kind of progress and development that would have brought with it. And I also would have enjoyed the competency that we would have seen with that. But the Americans chose otherwise. And now we have Donald Trump accompanied by J.D. Vance, who, I mean, any scratching the surface of his background revealed some very shady transactions that he's been involved in. But, you know, I mean, Trump is a convicted felon. So, you know, birds of a feather. The lunatic RFK Jr., who, as I saw somebody, a medical professional, comment yesterday, reigniting the debate about the possibility of MMR vaccines being linked to autism when it's been proved over decades with repeated surveys that they're not. This is bloody dangerous. And you're not a vaccine skeptic if you think that vaccines are bad. You're an ignorant, uninformed, and dangerous person. You don't deserve to be called skeptical. Skepticism is a normal and healthy person. If you want to undo the progress that has been made in humanity through vaccinating people against preventable diseases, you're a moron and you're utterly contemptible.
The life expectancy of children, Paul, measles, polio.
For the head of HHS, Tulsi Gabbard, as the Director of National Intelligence. It goes on. Pam Bondi as the replacement for Matt Gaetz as the the Attorney General. Oh, man, it's all shocking. It's all shocking.
It's shocking beyond belief. Mm-hmm. My brother, he's in the States. He's living in New Jersey. He's been there for longer than the amount of time you've been in Ukraine. And he went to the Madison Square Garden Trump rally. Yeah, the battles we've had and the fights we've had, I call it shameful.
If you can tell me how at that rally, Trump had a comedian on his schedule who said there's a floating pile of garbage out in the ocean, it's called Puerto Rico. And then Trump increased his share of the Latino vote. I don't get that. When you know, in parallel, Trump is talking about deporting the very migrant workers that are propping up the American economy. Something like 40% of farm jobs in the United States are undocumented migrants. Yeah. 40%. And Trump wants to round them all up and kick them out. And that will harm the U.S. economy in a series of cascading ways, because all of these things have knock-on effects. But the Latinos voted for him in increasing numbers.
They have the House, they have the Senate. Everyone has capitulated. It's beyond funny. It is absolutely beyond funny.
That's also another observation as well. Everyone has capitulated. ABC News has just capitulated to the tune of $16 million by apologizing to Trump for a word that George Stephanopoulos used in an interview segment. $15 million to Trump's presidential library and foundation, and $1 million in lawyers' fees. Almost immediately after the election, companies in the United States started saying that they were going to ditch their DEI policies. Diversion, equality, and inclusion are good things. But they were made into a culture war in the United States of America by these right-wing, predominantly grifters, fundamentally dishonest people. So they begin this culture war over diversity, equality, and inclusion. Those three things, we think that they're bad. And companies have since the election, come out and said that they're dropping their policies related to this. Here in Ukraine, for my organization, when I'm applying to international organizations for grants to run our national suicide prevention hotline, I'm asked what kind of policies that we have in place that are our standard policies on sexual discrimination, other kinds of discrimination, whether we promote equality. It's normal and standard stuff, man.
I was very upset and a little bit like yourself, Paul, getting consumed by it and trying to make a decision myself to back off, stop reading it, stop getting so upset. For anyone looking at my Twitter feed and all that kind of thing, people must think you're a nut job, you're in Ireland, calm the hell down. But it's a little bit like, do you just turn away and ignore it? And I don't think you can. Yeah, so I had the conversation with my brother. I'm very concerned about your great blah, blah. I said, yeah, I'm done with it. I was on radio in Ireland talking about it. I said it was shameful. I thought it was disgusting. So angry at America for in a democracy where they stupidly voted for this guy. And someone sent me a message saying, it was on LinkedIn, that I was so pleased to hear you saying the things that you were saying. I was feeling exactly the same. These things have to be called out. So I kind of made a decision myself. I'm not going to stop. And every single time you see a nut job decision being made because of a nut job being put in there and a stupid policy, reminding them every single time you voted for this. This is what you get. And my brother, to be fair to him, he said, well, and obviously he's not alone, yeah, this was a decision I made for my self-interest. You know, food and business performance, all that kind of thing. I said, wow. Just wait and see how good that decision turns out to be for you. And the crazy thing, Paul, it's as if, let's imagine for a second, that Russia was a democracy. For me, it's exactly the same as the Russians voting for Putin. You know, when full democracy, we can choose whoever we want. For me, it's the equivalent of Americans voting for Trump. You know he's a bad actor. You know he's a criminal. You know he's a rapist. You know he's a racist. You know he doesn't care about anyone. You know he can be bought. It's all about money. And with all of that knowledge, we still vote for him. It's just bizarre. A lot of people during the post-mortem about the election, they're talking about loads and loads and loads of different things. I do have to wonder, and very few people are saying this out loud, was it a gender thing?
Yeah, a good deal of it. A good deal. It was the same with Clinton as well, who was, I mean, one of the most qualified people ever to have run for the presidency. That saddens me. And I mean, again, like we go back to the DEI issue, and people were saying that about Kamala Harris, that she was the DEI candidate. And I'm like, I'm sorry, no, she was elected in the state of California as the prosecutor, except she's had a stunning career. She's supremely qualified, as was Hillary Clinton. But yes, there were too many people who, to me, it's insane. I was brought up by a single mother. I recognize the amazing capacity that strong women have. If one of them is strong enough to put herself in a position where she can lead the country, great. I have absolutely no reservations about a person's ability to lead anything based on their gender. But, you know, other people sadly think differently. But no, there was a good part of that. And I mean, you know, there was a good part of it. Do you know, like you mentioned something about food prices. right? And your brother's justification, I did it for my own reasons, right? So Trump has now come out again in the last 24 hours and said, well, you know what? The thing with grocery prices is that once they've gone up, it's very, very difficult to get them down again.
Yay.
Right? I mean, so, okay, he's finally come clean on that or admitted that it was just a nonsense all along. But you know what the way that played throughout the campaign is that whenever people were talking about the economy, the Biden-Harris economy, the retort from the right would always be, are you telling me that you don't think that food prices are too high in grocery stores right now? And they fell for it every time. And I don't see why they got themselves dragged into that. There are many, many things that are indicators of the performance of the economy as a whole, not just grocery store prices. We can set that aside. You want to talk about the economy, let's talk about the jobs, let's talk about inflation, let's talk about the reduction of the interest rate. These are all indications of the economy and what the economy is doing. But every time they try to point out that actually the US economy is in very, very good shape, they would come back and start talking about bloody grocery prices instead. It was a complete magician's trick, and they got away with it. Let me put a figure on that for you. It polled after the election, 60% of whatever the survey group was said that they thought that America was in a recession.
Yeah.
60%. Yeah. Think that America is in a recession, whereas in actual fact, the economic recovery from the shock that everybody took from COVID is one of the best in the world. And the leading economists have just called it the perfect soft landing. Biden and Harris managed it perfectly. 60% think they're in a recession. Nuts. I mean, people can vote based on their own interests. Okay, I get that. But people are voting based on lies, based on nonsense, fabrications.
So if we go to Russia, where we control all of the levers of media, we can control every single message. Mm-hmm. And then you go to the United States of America, which is the free world, or the absolute perfect model for the free world. Wow. How the truth doesn't break through in that society.
Well, we were just talking about the companies obeying in advance of DEI being a less important thing, obeying in advance of settling to the Trump Presidential Library for $15 million. Yeah, but by the way, the word that Stephanopoulos used, you've also used as well a few minutes ago in that list of things that Trump is. And the thing that I read from a lady who I read her writing all the time, but the day after the election, she wrote, the people I feel the most heartbroken for are the people who had stepped forward and accused him of improper sexual conduct, to know that millions of people have voted for their abuser.
Yeah.
That sums it up. To answer your question about ceding the information space, about just ignoring this, no, we need to be informed. We need to not obey in advance. I say that. I'm reading Timothy Snyder's Road to Unfreedom right now. In fact, but Don't Obey in Advance comes from one of Snyder's other books. We need to. And I've always said the same, and it's funny because you're drawing the parallels between the United States and Russia. I've always said the same about Russia and Russian propaganda as it has existed online for a very, very long time. For me, in my online world, as it existed to me in a very real manner for over a decade, since the beginning of the Revolution of Dignity, in fact. We're making these comparisons between Russia and the United States of America. That's a scary, scary thing. All of the levers of power, all concentrated in one set of hands, who happen to have, I told you I wrote an article describing contemporary Russia as fascist. The people who had served in senior positions in the first Trump administration have described him as fascist to the core.
Yeah.
His own. That was. I think he's one of his chiefs of staff, but I won't name him for fear of getting it wrong. But fascist to the core is what he called it.
I think it was John Kelly, isn't it?
Was it John Kelly? Okay, yeah. I think maybe it was, but not the only one. Okay, let's see what happens. My hope is that in 4 years' time there will be a proper and peaceful transition of power to something more sane and reality-based. But we saw what happened on January 6th, and we can't even guarantee that.
Well, in a way, it's not his fault, because the Republicans allowed him to run. The Republicans shut down anyone who was brave enough to speak up. The Republicans let him have a pass after January 6th.
Mm-hmm.
And he has watched them one after the other. He has watched his ability to, excuse my French now, to piss all over them, mm-hmm. to get them to kowtow to him. Mm-hmm. He has given them a playbook of brute force and power. He has shown them how to put people in their box, how to put the fear of God inside them. And now he has Zuckerberg and he has Jeff Bezos. He's got the guys from ChatGPT all kissing the ring with contributions to his inauguration parade. One by one, they're all queuing up. Again, when it comes to that, and Ukraine. So Zelensky has obviously had meetings with him recently as well. What does he need to do with Trump now? What can he do with Trump?
All that anybody can do with Trump is to appeal to his transactional nature and other parts of his psyche, which we've all observed for many years. And if you know how to game him right, as, for example, Kim Jong-un did, then you can switch him from threatening fire and disaster like has never been seen before, which he did with North Korea, to exchanging love letters and all that nonsense, right? Which started because Kim sent him an invitation for a meeting on a massive, great big 2-meter by 3-meter card, and Trump loved it. Right? That's how you blow smoke up his ass. That's it. You flatter him a little bit. So in the peace plan that Zelensky had discussed with Trump, there's a whole section about Ukraine's vast natural resources, which are trillions and trillions of dollars worth. And so therefore, it is a good idea to be allied with the independent state of Ukraine that owns such vast wealth, right? So there are ways and approaches, but again, people obeying in advance, because you talked about the Republicans and their responsibility for this, right? So, and the big money that he has on side and the games that he's playing with them. So one of the first things that Trump started talking about when he was naming his insane cabinet is recess appointments. So he was telling Congress, I am going to go around you. I don't care for, I don't need, I'm going to circumvent your approval of my cabinet, and I'm going to make them recess appointments, right? And what followed was a little bit of pushback of, well, no, you won't, because that's our right, and this is how it will be. And then the next thing was, apparently, anybody that is voting, planning to vote against, or talking about voting against Trump's picks will be primaried, and so could lose their seat. And who potentially is going to fund that? Well, Elon Musk. Elon Musk, who said that he was not going to donate to either candidate, who then, it is publicly disclosed, donated $270 million to Donald Trump. Elon Musk, who was then accused of violating election laws through those $1 million daily giveaways, that this billionaire thinks dangling $1 million for the poor people, makes him look like a altruistic benefactor, but really he's just a piss taker. Those are the kind of people who have bought their influence, and we will now see how they're going to deploy it. It's a very, very unsettling time for the United States. And one of the things actually that I thought was going to be a challenge, and I thought it was going to be a constitutional challenge too, was having a president who is a convicted felon and is facing other criminal charges too, but apparently not. That can all just be made to go away.
That's okay. If you're a presidential candidate, no, that's okay. If you get elected, that's okay. We'll forget about all of that.
Waive that, yeah.
Yeah, fit for purpose, being fit to run at all. Wow, the founding fathers, what must they be thinking?
I remember somebody asking the question, why isn't there something in the Constitution that would prohibit a convicted felon from running for the office of presidency? And the response was because the founding fathers never would have thought that such a thing could have been possible.
Yeah, exactly. My prediction with Elon and Donald is that'll come to blows very, very quickly. And then it'll be a vengeance game, and God knows who's going to win that one. Paul, we're coming up to Christmas, and you're obviously out and about with other fellow Ukrainians. You're in the queue in the shops. You're having cups of coffee. There's people getting together for meals. You're listening to the conversations, here, there, and everywhere. What are people saying? What is the mood like? And in a way, it finally has taken a toll on you with your stress, and it's resulted in sickness. I presume with every single neighbour of yours, maybe not realising it, it's chipping away and gnawing away at everyone all of the time.
It does gnaw away at us all, yes. And I'm very lucky in terms of my neighbours. I live in a nice residential complex, and we're a tight-knit community, and we know each other, especially those of us who stayed throughout the full-scale invasion. We know each other. What is the conversation? I had dinner last night with somebody who has been involved in pursuing certain Russian groups for war crimes legally through the courts. Also at this gathering was somebody who's with a venture capital fund, applying it to technologies that are being used to accelerate the victory, let's say. Some veterans, some journalists, some, a photographer, another lawyer working on human rights. I associate with, through accident or misfortune, but I associate with some really interesting people, and I'm fortunate to be with like-minded people who are equally committed to ensuring that Ukraine's victory is one that brings about a just peace. And, I know people are working on that, and the wheels of justice turn very, very slowly, but they have been applied with reflection to what a monster Putin is, that there is a war crimes arrest warrant out against him from the International Criminal Court in The Hague for the crime of stealing children. That's what a monster he is. And so what we're looking forward to is we're looking forward to justice being served. And justice means not only an end to the war. Peace is the lack of a threat of violence, not the lack of violence presently right now at this moment. It's the lack of a threat of violence. That is peace. And then it must be a just peace, which includes those who have committed war crimes paying the appropriate price for them, and the country of Russia and the people of Russia paying the appropriate financial price to rebuild Ukraine as well. So the $350 billion in frozen Russian central bank assets, which the Biden administration is now talking to people seriously about unblocking and directing to Ukraine. That's a down payment. That's a start. The value or the cost of repairing the damage that Russia has done in Ukraine is double that. It's $700 billion. And that's without the moral damage, the psychological damage, the heartbreak of having lost so many people. But victory, real peace, the lack of a threat of violence through having neutered Russia's military capacity, justice, reparations. That's the conversation here.
Okay, and even with the barista in the coffee shop, casual conversation, or the woman, at the veg shop as you're picking things up, that casual conversation with just on the street, regular people, are they like, oh, for God's sake, let's just go for peace, or is it all in? We're just all in.
The casual conversations, they're really just the most polite and kind and friendly interactions that you could hope to find anywhere. And that's something that I think a lot of people fail to realize about Ukraine. Just what a country of European norms this is. The people here are very, very, very European. When We will get into deeper conversations in appropriate company, but yes, a better example is if I'm passing people on the street and I'm eavesdropping on conversations, which by the way today can be mixed. It can be a group speaking in Russian or a group speaking in Ukrainian. There's no language divide in this country. People speak whatever language they want, and it's usually both, and we dip in and out. Or I don't anymore. I've switched only to Ukrainian. But when I hear snippets of conversations next to me, it's always about the war. It's about the war effort, the latest atrocities, how they might have affected people who are close to us, people who are donating. But it's all done with absolute defiance and not just resilience, but resolute resilience. That's what I hear if I'm picking up on what's going on around me, the signals.
Okay. Would you say people have changed?
Yeah, war changes you. War changes you. I saw a window sticker in the back of a truck that was kitted out for military use, one of these donated previous civilian vehicles. And it said no sympathy with a picture of an automatic weapon. And it said attitude hardened by war. You've seen me on social media, right? When I don't even remember when this started. It was probably around 250,000 or 280,000 or whatever it was. But somebody commented every time we pass through 10,000 casualties, we should do. And I've actually got the perfect photograph for that, and it's me, and it's a still out of a video that we shot. It was to celebrate my friend's 40th birthday, right? And so we got together. We all dressed up in crazy clothes. We filmed this whole video for him to play for him at his birthday, and I'm dressed up in a pink rap, style kind of nonsense. And there's people around me and all the scenes we're in a nightclub, right? And there's a bouncer over in the corner who I won't name him, but he later became a Ukrainian ambassador to another country. Again, like a good crowd of people. But I post that every 10,000 Russian casualties as my happy dance. Attitudes hardened by war, no sympathy.
Yeah.
No sympathy. You have come here, you've invaded this country, you commit war crimes, you commit atrocities, you're depriving people of their homes, their lives, their villages, the rapes, the executions of prisoners of war. Screw every single last one of you.
Yeah.
Hardened by war. Their death toll is 760,000. I don't know what I'll do if it reaches 1 million. Maybe go and re-record the video and release it as a video. I mean, it's screw them. Hardened by war. Yeah, we're all changed by it, but we'll all be changed as well by the victory.
Yeah,
and what comes after.
You're on the Win Happy podcast, Paul. Can we even talk about happiness right now? Coming up to Christmas. Okay, go for it.
No, it's exactly what I just said.
Yeah, okay.
We can talk about the victory, and we can talk about what comes after it. I look very much forward to what this country will be as it proudly creates its future.
Yeah,
and I see so many times, Greg, with people commenting about their participation in the war. I watched a film yesterday by the Kyiv Independent about war medics, and there's another very common thing as well. Is we are doing this now so that our children don't have to, or we are building a better country for our children's future. That is everything to them. It is the next generation and leaving this country a better place, which, they are, whether we're born in Dublin or in Cork or Kyiv or Sevastopol, right? They are our aspirations to leave the world a better place for our children. Ukrainians, sadly, are having to pay the highest price for this at the moment, but what they will do from that, after that, I believe is going to be something truly special, and I'm lucky to be a part of this society.
Now, I've asked you a very, very specific question this time last year and the year before that. Do you know what the question is?
Yeah, the question is, do I have a Christmas tree?
Yeah. Will one go up this year?
So, okay, a little story. A very, very good friend of mine has just left Ukraine, following her heart. She moved to another country, and She'd left Kyiv at the beginning of the full-scale invasion for a few months. She went to her home in Western Ukraine. And when she came back, she decided to cheer herself up with a new plan. And she bought the biggest one that she could see and then realized she couldn't get it home. So she phoned me and she said, come and pick me up. She's at like a garden center. And I got a big car, right? So she just gave me this plant because she's moving overseas, right? And it happens to be wrapped up. It's not a Christmas tree, but it happens to be wrapped up with a light garland. And it's part of, I can show it to you, it's over here in my guitar corner. So if you can see that tree.
I can.
That's got the light garland wrapped around it. But it's not about a Christmas celebration. It's for when my power goes off. That's one of my, it's one of my light sources. I've got a battery strip light here. The battery lights up on the plan. And I have a couple of candles on my coffee table. And that's me done and sorted.
Cool. Tell me, how's your son doing?
He's marvelous. He's marvelous. As you know, I went and spent a few weeks with him recently, and I'm just very proud of this man that he is. He's great. He's in absolutely fine form. Thank you for asking.
Yeah. Is he worried about his dad?
He knows me well enough. He knows me well enough to worry the appropriate amount.
Yeah. Paul, thank you so much. I hope this is the last war podcast that we have to do at Christmas. Do you think it will be?
As I mentioned earlier on, the outcome of this war will be determined by the people who have to fight it, and Ukraine has demonstrated exceptional bravery and determination, and wants this done as soon as possible. So let's say that is certainly my hope, that yes, this is the last one discussing that state, and that if we do it again next year, I'll have a proper Christmas tree because I'll be feeling Christmassy.
Well,
let's hope.
Maybe what we will do when that happens, whether it be next year or the year after, I will come and visit your wonderful Christmas markets in Kyiv, visit that beautiful city. I can inspect your tree and listen to some of your guitar playing.
Let's do that. And over the years, again, going back to Twitter, over the years, I developed some friendships on that platform. And another one of my friends moving away, we'd met in person in the UK when I was on a trip there, but she was moving to Australia. And I said to her, before you go to Australia, you have to come and visit Kyiv. And she flew over just for a weekend, and she was blown away. Just as with any first-time visitor to this city, I mean, you have your expectations, and then you see the splendor of this place, and so book yourself a good few days, and we'll do some touring around, and you'll see some sights.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Paul, please take care of yourself. Merry Christmas.
All the very best to you, Greg. Merry Christmas to you and your family.
Yeah, take it easy, man. Cheers. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.